Well, here we go. Happy Tuesday. I am super excited to be here today. I have to tell you, I probably said that last week and the week before that, but this has become rapidly my favorite day of the week because I love spending time with all of you in this awesome community. And I love introducing you to these amazing women. And today is no exception. Today, you're going to have the rare opportunity to learn from a very powerful attorney who works and specializes with people who are either starting a business or have a small business. And that is her specialty. I'm very excited to have her here. She is our special guest. So we're going to kick off today, and I'm going to introduce you to the one and only brilliant Shavon Smith, lawyer. Here we go, Shavon. Can you say hi?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. And thank you for all of those kind words, powerful, brilliant. Thank you.
All of it. So first, I'd love for people to get to know you a little bit. I know you have a background from a high power firm, and you decided to break off and branch into what you're specializing now. And I would love if you would take a minute and share your background, why you did that, and why you love what you do.
Absolutely. So I actually, when I first left law school, I worked for a judge for 2 years, a fantastic experience, and then ended up working in a big law firm for multiple years. And it was a great experience. I learned a lot. I got to make a lot of money, but it was never the thing that I wanted to do forever. And I kept having these dreams of owning a business. I had thought about opening up a state farm agency. I had thought about lots of different things. But the job made the decision for me when they fired me in February 2013 that it was time to go. And it was a very like unforgettable day. It was the Monday after Super Bowl, and I came
Wow.
to work and I was terminated. What's funny though is that that same year before this, in January, I had made a vision board and I had all these images of being an entrepreneur, women who are entrepreneurs, and just kind of had them on the board. And it really just kind of a month later, this happened. And so when I wasn't sold on starting my firm yet. I actually interviewed for a couple jobs
Mhm.
and nothing felt right. I felt like I don't like working in big firms. I didn't want to work with the people I was interviewing with. And knew I needed to kind of scratch the entrepreneurial itch. And I had a lot of friends who were business owners. I had always admired business owners, and talking with them knew that there weren't a ton of lawyers who really specialized in helping them. Like everyone knew a family law attorney, everyone knows a criminal law attorney. People didn't always know a business attorney who worked with kind of smaller enterprises. And so I just decided, to take my legal skills, and help and start my business helping other business owners. And I've been doing it since 2014, and it's been an amazing ride.
That is awesome. Well, there's a lot of great things that you said. One of the things is, it's funny. I always say God may close one door so you can open another. And sometimes things happen, and in the moment it seems terrible, but it's really taking you to the next level where you're supposed to go. I can tell you though, yeah, it is very difficult to find somebody who does what you do. And I have many friends who've started a business and they don't know, you know, what they're supposed to be doing. They just have an idea and they start to make money. So let's kind of dive in if we can. When people are looking at moving forward, either they have a business or they're about to start one, there are reasons that would cause them to either stay a sole proprietor or to incorporate, and it circles around taxes and liability. Have at it. What can you tell everybody?
So I would say, once you create an entity, it separates you from the business. So the business gets sued and you don't get sued. The business is paying taxes, you're not paying taxes. And a lot of that depends on the type of entity that you select for your business. But I always tell people, because it is relatively easy in the United States to start to incorporate, whether it is an LLC or a corporation, it does make sense sometimes earlier on to start having those discussions about when to do it. Sole proprietor, if you are already a licensed professional and maybe you don't need to have the entity behind you, that may make sense. Maybe you're starting out, it's a side hustle or something part-time, then it may make sense, because I'm a very practical person. Like if you may not have the money right away to jump out and incorporate, it's not the end of the world if you are operating as a sole proprietor. But once you start hiring people, contracting with people, you might want to think about how can I turn this into an entity. And when I talk about ease, I am helping a client incorporate something in Panama, and it costs thousands of dollars. They want all sorts of documents. In
Mm.
most places in the United States, it is a very go online, you fill out very minimal information, you pay somewhere between 100, $300, $400, or $500, and you have your entity that protects you and your personal assets from anything in the business. But also, there are tax benefits, there are write offs, there are expenses for your business. And then, we just saw with the PPP loans, you could get a PPP loan as a sole proprietor, but it's great when you have that kind of separate documentation and paperwork to apply for things. So those are the things you're thinking about when you're saying, is it time for me to take the next step and incorporate my business?
So let's say, somebody starts out and they're like, okay, they understand there are tax benefits, there's protection and liability benefits. If they have employees, it sounds like you're saying that's a good move. What about if somebody is going ahead and they're building a business and it's just them? Maybe they're in sales, maybe they're a realtor, or they may have like an assistant, but not a big team or anything like that. What would be the trigger? Is there a certain amount of money or a certain amount of exposure? What would trigger them to go, well, this might be a good time for me to do that?
So I would say when you are operating as your own person, the likelihood that you may co-mingle funds, or you just want to create some separation between you and your business. And I
Hmm.
think once you start growing, that's when you want, or even earlier than that, to create that entity. But again, because it's relatively easy to do, and that most people can do it on their own, I always recommend people to do it on their own. It does make sense, sooner rather than later, to think about getting some sort of incorporation, a simple LLC, a single member LLC, for your business. And I would say, just to answer your question specifically, you're saying, if I am just, not just, but a realtor, or just a sole really just working in a solo capacity, when does it make sense? And for me, I really work in a solo capacity. I have contractors that work with me. But I had a certain name I wanted to use. I wanted to set up separate bank accounts. I wanted to make sure everything was really separate from my personal life, get separate lines of credit, which you can't do as a sole proprietor because it's all you. And obviously, even when you're starting out, sometimes you're getting credit and it's based on you, but you want to be able to build up business credit, so your business can go out and buy things, your business can buy a car, and then those become really beneficial to you to have. You have your personal credit, but business credit as well. And the sooner you start your entity, the greater chance you're building that up for your business.
Yeah, that's great advice. It's funny because years ago I started my business in my own name. And as I moved along, my accountant was like, you should do this, you should do that. And I remember when he told me I could have a company car, I'm like, oh, this is awesome. But there's a lot of, write-offs and advantages that you do get. So can you help everybody with what the different options are? Because there's multiple options. There's just not one way to do this. And maybe a little bit, if you don't mind, about the difference between them. That would be really great.
Yeah, so there are a plethora of options. Most people are choosing between a limited liability company
Mhm.
or a corporation. So a limited liability company, it's kind of a misnomer because you have full liability when you have a LLC for your business, but it operates. Um, so for instance, when you file taxes for LLC, they do end up on your personal taxes, but they end up on the Schedule C, much like they would for a sole proprietor. So that's a little bit of a difference. And then the documentation is different for the entities that you have as well. But I always, people sometimes want to draw the distinction, like LLCs are smaller businesses and corporations are bigger businesses, but some of huge, corporations have chosen to go the LLC route for their business. So it's a limited liability company. You have members as opposed to shareholders, which I'll talk about next. And you don't, this gets in the weeds a little bit, but because things end up on your personal taxes, you don't have like a separate tax for the LLC, or double taxation for the LLC. And then in order to create that, again, you would file articles of organization with your respective state. Um, Typically, you will want an operating agreement, and it's almost akin to like a partnership agreement that lays out everything between all the members. And then lots of people choose the corporation option. Corporations have shareholders as opposed to members who are owners. And so a corporation, you would need a shareholders agreement and bylaws in order to create that corporation. Corporations are double taxed because the shareholders are taxed on their dividends, the profits they get, but the corporation is also taxed as well. And sometimes when people are trying to decide which one, I remind them that corporations tend to, they have a lot more requirements. You have to have a yearly meeting. You want to make sure you have minutes and you've documented everything that you've done in the business. You need to have at least one director, you need to have a secretary, but those can all be the same person. So sometimes people choose a corporation because they do want the formalities in a business. They are going to be seeking investment, some sort of VC funding or investors, and they want to easily be able to sell shares of the business, or they just want to create that sort of structure where they have a board, they have a chairman of the board for their business. LLC is easier, but I remind people you don't want to be lazy about the easiness. You still want to document things. You want to make sure you have everything in place. So those are really the two main entities. But then there are also partnerships, which are two people coming together, for a joint venture together.
Mhm.
And, if you and I decided to stand on the corner and sell pies together, we formed a partnership because we're doing something jointly with one another. There are limited partnerships. A lot of times, maybe real estate holdings or things like that will have limited partnerships. But
Sure.
for most people, you're choosing and thinking about, am I forming a limited liability company or am I forming a corporation?
And do people ever still do S corps or things along those lines? And what would
So
be the
the S
distinction of that?
corp is interesting. So an S corp is a tax designation. So a limited liability company can be an S corporation, but a corporation can also be an S corp as well. And the benefit, there are tax benefits to why a person would choose that status. A lot of times when the owners are on payroll, that status will make sense for the business.
Mhm.
But there are some restrictions. You can only have 100 owners. So if you're going to have, lots of different shareholders or owners, you couldn't choose it. And the owners all have to be US citizens. So if any of your owners are going to, be foreign citizens and live in other places, then you wouldn't choose that designation. And I always remind people when they're choosing their entity, because it's a tax question and a legal question, you want to be talking to both professionals at the same time sometimes, just to get insight
That's
into what
great.
makes sense. You may have some personal tax issues that weigh on things, some personal planning that is being done that weigh on things. So you want to make sure you have a holistic conversation about what to choose.
And actually, something just popped into my head. I'm going to throw at you if that's okay. But sometimes people are also, going through a divorce or they're involved in legal issues. How does that impact what should they incorporate? They shouldn't incorporate. What about that piece of it?
Gosh, yeah, no, that's a good point. I would say a lot of that depends on the state you live in, what the laws may be kind of concerning divorce. So that may be a big determinant. Um, if it is, if you're trying to prove, it depends on what you're trying to prove. If you're trying to make sure a spouse doesn't obtain, a portion of the business, um, maybe if you have a corporation and you've documented that they're not an owner. But again, it depends on the state. If it's a community property state, that they may get a piece of the business. But a lot of times when drafting either a shareholder agreement for a corporation or operating agreement for LLC, you may have clauses in there that speak to that. That will speak to people agree that their spouses will sign this disclaimer that they don't, are entitled to any, or that people will agree to have some sort of nuptial agreement with their spouse about the LLC interest, because it does and can become part of the marital estate, the business, especially if that person offered any assistance or worked in the business.
And then it's really interesting because if somebody is listening to this and they're taking notes, they're like, okay, great, great, great. And we have people who watch this live and we have people who watch it,
Yes.
when they get home from work or tomorrow when it's quiet or whatever it is. But some people will absorb this like that and they'll go, okay. And then I know there's going to be some people going, holy smokes, I feel like a deer in headlights, right? Because I'm a lawyer, you're a lawyer, we're like, da, 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 da. So, one of the things that's interesting is you mentioned that it is affordable for someone to, start an LLC or start a business. If they, when do you come in for someone who's really green? Like, would you say if they don't understand anything you just said that we're talking about, they should come to you and go, which one should I do? Or they could go ahead and form it and then go, hey, did I do it right? Like, when do you kind of piece yourself in to assist people, as their lawyer?
So it really depends. I mean, there are people who come to me more sophisticated and they've already formed their entity. They kind of know exactly what they need and that can kind of happen there. There are people who just need help talking through what we just talked about choosing an entity, even where to incorporate, maybe especially in this area where you have, DC and Maryland, people are thinking about where to incorporate. So it just depends on kind of a person's comfort level. But I also think that when you own a business, it's very important to have a community like you've built here. And that's when it becomes really important to reach out to other business owners and get their take on it and kind of get their insight on how they started, what were some of the first steps they took, when did they first hire an attorney, and get that insight would be really useful as well, because you don't want to. Someone called me the other day and she had just started like a side hustle and she talked to a lawyer who was like over lawyering her, like, you need to do all this, you need to have all these licenses, you need to do this right away. And she probably does need those things eventually, but when you are piecing it together and you're trying to invest back in the business, you want to make practical choices and practical decisions about what really is my risk, what really is important. And some of that comes from talking to fellow business owners as well to get their take too.
Yeah, that's great. And also, we could talk about this for a whole nother day, but going to those big firms is crazy expensive as opposed to going to a small firm. You're paying for that presence, that name, that office. And if you're a startup, that's a little bit ouchy,
It is. And I will say, I know DC has this, and I know a lot of other jurisdictions do as well. If you are truly starting out and money is an issue, call your bar and see if they have some pro bono programs. Like, for instance, the DC bar, they have a small business clinic. They have monthly or even more frequently, so you can get on the phone with a practicing attorney in your jurisdiction and kind of get their opinion on some few issues. You may even meet someone you like that you may want to form a relationship with. And then there's also education. So it may be that you don't know what you don't know. So you might even want to get yourself to a baseline of webinars, going on various websites. And not to play Google lawyer, because people do mess themselves up sometimes when they do that. But
Yeah.
you want to have a certain amount of kind of knowledge yourself as well.
Yeah, that's great. And it's wonderful that there are people like you that are, somebody that they can go, okay, this person's really going to be committed to me. I'm going to be their client. They're going to take care of me. I don't have to take out a second mortgage on my house to afford the human being I'm talking to at this moment. So, I've always felt like small firms are such a really nice option. I feel like the big firms are for the big corporations dunking a lot of money. But, for somebody who's starting, someone like you is a lot more practical and you get a lot more attention too, I think too.
No, absolutely. And I think that, when you're starting and your problems are small, you want to purchase accordingly. Obviously, if there's some sort of bet the company litigate, there are reasons that you may need to engage a bigger firm in your business. But when you're starting out, it for most people, it makes sense to go to a smaller firm who is fully capable. And again, I'm a solo, but there are small firms that are 3, 4, 5 people that may have more disciplines and can still be a cost-effective option.
Awesome. And then there are certain things that are important for somebody who's a small business owner, whether there's certain contracts they should have or certain things that if they come along, maybe they should have reviewed. What are your feelings on that? Let's say I'm a brand new business owner and I've got a contract with my first vendor, or I'm doing, I need to send a contract out, or somebody's made one with me, or should I worry about employee handbook, or what are the things that would be important outside of the formation of your entity?
Absolutely. So I would say the formation, and I would include in the formation making sure if you have partners, you have partnership agreements. It is very not uncommon for people to go in business with people they love and then hate each other. And then it's all messed up. So you like that, I would say those are very, very important first steps. But then beyond that, if you are not making money, you're not really in business. So you want to do the things that bring the money in and protect it. And so that would be your contracts with clients, customers, whatever, how you're operating, that money is coming into the door. You want to make sure those agreements are tight. You want to make sure those agreements have clear terms on, and this is kind of true for most agreements, clear terms on who is doing what, when do you get paid, and like when, methods, timing, what happens if you're late, just like not just how much, but kind of delving into the when you get paid, what happens if there's a dispute, what happens if somebody wants to terminate, how can you terminate. So I would say the first, making sure you have those client agreements in place, to make sure you're getting paid on time, and if there is an issue with customers, clients, you have a way to address it. And then I would say, on top of the whole gamut of whatever that may look like for your business. And so if you're not in business until you're making money, you need people to scale the business. So then the next thing, a lot of people start out, they hire independent contractors because it is cost effective. It is something people need to be careful about. You can't hire, the example I always give is if you hire an assistant who works in your building at your desk with a computer that you gave them, they work 40 hours a week, you pay them overtime when they work, they don't have any other clients, like that is kind of smelling like that person is an employee of your business, especially if you're doing
Absolutely. Yeah.
something ethical. But then if you have like a marketing person or a graphics person who they have a ton of the clients, they are doing things for you periodically, then that kind of smells more like contractor. So a lot of times people want to say, I hired contractors. And just because you call the person a contractor and you give them a contractor agreement, it doesn't make them an independent contractor. So you want to make sure that you're going to the Department of Labor's website and the IRS. They all have standards on what makes a contractor. And so, the people piece, when people are starting out, they use contractors a lot. So if you have a properly classified contractor, you do want to make sure you have an independent contractor agreement with that person, that will spell out a lot of the same terms I described before, like what are they doing? When are they getting paid? How can you terminate if you need to? Um, Clearly stating that they're not an employee of your business. So that's another big contract that people need for their business. And then, you may need an NDA, some sort of confidentiality agreement, depending on how you're doing business and what you're doing in your business. But I would say those are the big two ones to think about in those early stages for sure.
And that's interesting because, I always I cringe and get nervous when someone's like, I just printed something off the internet. So, it seems like they should either, if they're going to go that route, maybe have somebody like you review it or just have somebody like you write it. But, am I crazy? Is it safe to just like print something and roll with it? Should you have somebody eyeball it? What about people who are pulling things off the net? Not that it's all bad, but what's your advice on that?
I mean, I think that there are different, I mean, so it could be off the net, but it can be, so there are attorneys who sell contracts. That may be a better option, or even like a legal Zoom, as opposed to a true Google search and you just found a free document that's protected and you don't have to pay for.
Mm,
It's so a couple of things. One, you don't know why they drafted that agreement the way they drafted it. There could have been certain things that are not specific to your business, or um, time frames, payment clauses that were negotiated in the part and born out of the parties kind of back and forth, that you may not need or want, or may be detrimental to you in your business. You may have something in there. So say you're in Maryland and you pull a contract from Georgia and you just change the law to Maryland. You could have clauses in there. You could have non-compete clauses in there that don't work in the jurisdiction that you're in. You other
absolutely.
things that don't make sense. So it can be tricky, especially when you're thinking about across jurisdictions, pulling something from offline that's not vetted. But again, like if you're buying from some sort of source, like another attorney who sells contracts, that may be a better option than just a pure, I just found this, on the third page of my Google search.
And you brought up something really interesting I hadn't thought of, because you mentioned earlier, sometimes people go into business with somebody and it doesn't work out. And I have seen that more times than I care to count. And normally what I've seen,
Oh, messy.
yeah, like people go into business and it's like a friend or a relative and they have the same idea and they're like, this is awesome. And they're
Yeah.
super excited and they hit the ground running. And the most common thing I've seen is a difference in lifestyle and work ethic.
Values, absolutely, yeah.
One person's like type A, they want to make $1 billion. They'll work all day, they'll work all night. The other person's like, I love this, but it's 6 o'clock. I want to go spend time with my kids. I'm done. Or I've now hit the income level I want. I'm cool. But now two people own the business. So if somebody finds themselves in that situation, then what? Is this where you come into play again? Like, what do they do if they have a corporation and they have some kind of legal agreement where they're tied together?
Yeah. So this is when I am doing an operating agreement or shareholder agreement for new businesses. I typically send a questionnaire, and there are things in there that people maybe hadn't thought about. What happens if someone is disabled and they can't work for a period of time? Are they still getting paid? What happens? Who's doing what? Have you agreed to who's doing what? So I think even forcing those conversations early on is very important. But in your example, what's difficult about that example is that presumably they're 50-50. And so I just had this conversation with a friend. It's very difficult to get people to not want to be fair when it helps them. Because typically people come, they're two partners, we're 50-50, it's all good. I'm like, there's going to come a point in time where you don't agree, you know? And so it's best to let that time be now and maybe have a 51-49 stake so that you're not having the kind of butting heads and deadlocks. But again, it's very difficult for people because we all believe in fairness and equity, and we're doing this together and we need to be 50-50 owners. So if that's the case, early on in those partnership or agreements with your partner, you want to have some sort of like deadlock. Like maybe it's a third person who can come in and evaluate the situation and say that this is what it is, which could go to alleviating a lot of headache because you're relying on this other person to make a decision. Other options are, you can obviously go to a mediator, or typically you may have clauses in the operating agreement that will speak to this. Like if there is a period of 90, 60, 180 days where there is a major decision, whatever that may be, maybe that major decision is bringing on another partner and the parties don't agree, then one party can buy out the other party, and kind of pre-agree that if we don't agree, one of us will buy out the other party. So you definitely want to think about what happens if we don't get along when you're getting along with someone early on, in the beginning. But it is a tough situation because people rarely are going into business with strangers. They're typically going in with people they know, they love, they've worked with in other capacities, and then it becomes more challenging.
Yeah, I've seen some friendships really torn apart just based on everything was great, but like I said, the ambition level and stuff is different, and that's a tough one because neither person wants to lose the business when things like that happen. Well, this is awesome. I don't know how half an hour goes by like that.
It's so quick. I just looked up like, how did that? Like, did we talk about everything we were supposed to talk about?
It's so quick, isn't it? Well, one of the things I was going to ask you is, again, like we have some people who watch it live and then some people trickle in. Would it be okay if somebody wants to post a question below this and they tag you since you're in the group?
Oh, absolutely. I would be happy to respond and give my insight for sure.
Great. And if anybody's looking for a lawyer in the group too, so they could find you if they need your services as well, either way, right?
Really, always happy to chat with new business owners. And even if I'm not in your jurisdiction, like I can maybe recommend someone who can help you for sure.
Yeah, you're licensed in DC, Maryland, and Michigan, right? Okay, excellent. Well, I thank you so much. This is really exciting. We had a lot of requests for information on this. There's a lot of people in here who are looking at that, started a business, and we have a ton of real estate agents in here also. And just real quick, I think actually before we wrap up, because we already wrapped up. If somebody's a realtor, do you ever have realtors that decide to incorporate or do things like that too?
Absolutely, realtors decide to incorporate, or they are so busy that they need help, so they're hiring assistants and independent contractors to come in, so they need help with that. Or sometimes people just get in sticky real estate situations with their contracts with the people they're representing, and they just want to talk through that as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm
This was
very
a lot of
grateful
fun.
to have you in here.
You.
Yep, and we will be back here next Tuesday with part two. We will be taking a different excuse me, of being an entrepreneur, not the legal piece of it, but more of how to grow it as well. So you got to do this is the key though, because if you
Yeah,
don't
foundational.
if you don't have the foundation and then you build it, you got a big, huge nightmare. So you have to do the things that she's telling you. So thank you for your kindness and your generosity. You give lawyers a good name by being so sweet and coming in here for free.
I try to make the profession right, raise the profession up.
Absolutely. You and me both. Well, thank you. I appreciate you from the bottom of my heart. And anybody on here, as she said, you can go ahead and, post some questions as you watch this. So that's it. Have a fantastic day. I'll see you next Tuesday. And thank you again so much for coming on here and helping the community. We really appreciate you.
Thank you again. I appreciate it.
Take care.